I still remember the moment that made me question almost everything I thought I knew about people. It happened during an ordinary conversation at work. Nothing dramatic. No argument. No confrontation. Yet somehow, I walked away agreeing to something I never wanted to do, and I couldn't explain why. That feeling stayed with me for days. At the time, I thought I was making my own decisions. Later, I realized something unsettling. Sometimes the strongest influence isn't obvious at all. It's invisible. A few years ago, I worked in a mid-sized marketing company in Chicago. My days followed a predictable routine. I arrived around 8:30, grabbed coffee from the lobby cafe, answered emails, attended meetings, and went home. Like most people, I believed I was fairly independent in my thinking. I wasn't someone who was easily persuaded. At least that's what I told myself. One of my co-workers, Ethan, had a reputation for getting people to help him. Need someone to stay late? Ask Ethan. Need support for a project? Ask Ethan. Need volunteers for a difficult assignment? Ethan always found them. The strange thing was that nobody seemed upset about it. People genuinely liked him. Including me. At first, I assumed he was simply charismatic. But over time, I noticed something unusual. Whenever Ethan asked for help, people almost never said no. Even when they were busy. Even when helping created extra work. Even when they complained about it later. I remember watching this happen repeatedly. Someone would tell me they were overwhelmed. An hour later, Ethan would have a conversation with them. By the end of the day, they were helping him with something. It didn't make sense. One afternoon, I became the target. I was finishing a report that needed to be submitted before the weekend. I had plans that evening. I was already behind schedule. Then Ethan stopped by my desk. "Quick question," he said. I looked up. He smiled casually. Nothing unusual. He asked if I could review a presentation he was preparing. 5 minutes, he said. Just a quick look. That sounded reasonable. I agreed. 5 minutes became 15. Then 20. Then he mentioned another issue. Before I realized it, nearly an hour had passed. When I finally returned to my work, I was frustrated. Not with Ethan. With myself. Why had I agreed? I remember sitting there thinking about the conversation. Nothing felt manipulative. Nothing felt dishonest. Yet somehow, I had ended up exactly where Ethan wanted me. That bothered me. A few days later, I started paying closer attention. Not just to Ethan. To everyone. And what I discovered changed the way I viewed human behavior forever. The first thing I noticed was how much people wanted consistency. If someone agreed to something small, they became more likely to agree to something larger later. I saw it happen constantly. A manager would ask for a small update. Then a larger report. Then additional responsibilities. People rarely questioned the progression. Because once they saw themselves as helpful or cooperative, they wanted their actions to remain consistent with that identity. I began recognizing the pattern everywhere. In workplaces. Friendships. Relationships. Even in myself. The realization made me uncomfortable. Not because people were controlling each other. Because most of them weren't doing it intentionally. It was simply how human psychology worked. Then another experience deepened my curiosity. One evening, I met an old friend named Marcus for dinner. We hadn't seen each other in months. As we talked, he told me about a new investment opportunity. At first, I wasn't interested. The numbers sounded uncertain. The risks seemed obvious. Yet as the conversation continued, something strange happened. My resistance slowly weakened. Not because Marcus presented better evidence. Because he kept mentioning people I respected. People who had already invested. People who believed in the opportunity. Successful people. Smart people. Responsible people. By the end of dinner, I found myself considering something I had already decided against. Driving home, I caught myself. Why was my opinion changing? The facts hadn't changed. Only my perception of what other people believed. That realization hit harder than I expected. I wasn't evaluating the opportunity itself. I was responding to social proof. To the subtle comfort that comes from following a group. For thousands of years, belonging to the group helped humans survive. Being accepted often meant safety. Being rejected often meant danger. Our brains still carry traces of that history. Even when no real danger exists. The more I observed, the more examples appeared. People trusted confidence over accuracy. They followed certainty even when evidence was weak. They interpreted popularity as truth. They judged messages differently depending on who delivered them. The patterns were everywhere. And once I noticed them, I couldn't stop seeing them. But the most important lesson arrived when I least expected it. A few months later, our company hired a new employee named Sarah. She was quiet, professional, competent. But many people kept their distance. Including me. I didn't dislike her. I simply assumed she wasn't interested in connecting with others. She rarely joined group conversations. She usually ate lunch alone. She seemed reserved. Over time, a story formed in my mind. Sarah wasn't friendly. Sarah preferred isolation. Sarah wasn't interested in relationships. The strange thing was that Sarah never actually said any of those things. I had created the entire narrative myself. One afternoon, I found myself working late. To my surprise, Sarah was there too. We ended up talking while waiting for a report to finish processing. What started as small talk became a conversation that lasted nearly an hour. During that conversation, I learned something unexpected. Sarah wasn't distant at all. She was simply anxious in unfamiliar social situations. Large groups drained her energy. New environments made her cautious. She often worried about saying the wrong thing. Everything I had assumed was wrong. Completely wrong. Driving home that night, I felt embarrassed. Not because I had treated her badly. Because I had trusted my assumptions. My brain had taken limited information and created a complete story. And I believed it without question. That experience revealed what may be the most powerful psychological influence of all. The stories we tell ourselves. Most people imagine influence coming from other people. Advertisements. Persuasion. Manipulation. Pressure. But often the strongest influence comes from inside our own minds. We fill gaps with assumptions. We interpret silence. We assign motives. We create explanations. Then we react to those explanations as if they're facts. That realization changed how I viewed nearly every interaction. When someone ignored a message, I stopped assuming they were upset. When someone seemed distant, I stopped assuming they disliked me. When someone behaved unexpectedly, I became more curious than judgmental. And something surprising happened. My relationships improved. Not because people changed. Because my perception changed. I started asking more questions. Listening more carefully. Making fewer assumptions. The world became less predictable but more accurate. Over time, I also became aware of how often people unknowingly influence each other. A compliment can shape confidence. A label can shape identity. An expectation can shape behavior. Sometimes people rise because someone believed in them. Sometimes people shrink because someone convinced them they couldn't succeed. Words carry psychological weight. Even casual words. Especially casual words. Yet I learned something equally important. Influence itself isn't good or bad. It's a tool. The same psychological principles that manipulate people can also encourage them. The same understanding of human behavior can build trust instead of exploiting it. The difference lies in intention. That became my biggest perspective shift. Before, I viewed influence as something suspicious. Something used by marketers, politicians, or persuasive personalities. Now I see it differently. Influence exists in every human interaction. Every conversation. Every friendship. Every relationship. Every decision. The question isn't whether influence exists. The question is whether we're aware of it. Because awareness changes everything. When we understand how psychology shapes perception, we become less controlled by unconscious patterns. We pause before accepting assumptions. We question first impressions. We become curious about our own thinking. And curiosity is powerful. It creates space between reaction and understanding. Space between judgment and empathy. Space between appearance and truth. Looking back, Ethan never became the villain in my story. Marcus wasn't manipulating me. Sarah wasn't hiding from people. The real discovery wasn't about them. It was about me. About the invisible shortcuts my mind used every day. About how easily perception becomes reality. About how often certainty is simply an unfinished story. Now, whenever I catch myself making a quick judgment about someone, I remember that conversation with Sarah. Whenever I feel pressured toward a decision, I ask myself why. Whenever a situation seems obvious, I look a little closer. Because the most influential psychological forces are rarely the loudest ones. They're usually the quiet assumptions operating in the background. The ones we never notice. And maybe that's the hidden truth behind human behavior. Most people aren't controlling our minds. Most of the time, our minds are quietly influencing themselves. The question is, how many of your strongest beliefs are actually based on reality, and how many are stories you've repeated so often that they started to feel true?